GS Youngblood, welcome to the Orgasmic Lifestyle Podcast. It's a real pleasure to have you here. For those who are unfamiliar with your work, could you tell us what you do?
I'm an author and a men's coach, and I wrote two books for men. The first is The Masculine in Relationship, and the second one is called The Art of Embodiment.
Okay, so what inspired you to follow this path?
Wow, that's a big question. It was the failure of my first marriage, and this is a marriage that ended about 15 years ago, and ended in ways that were particularly painful for me. And by the end of that relationship, I had allowed myself to become emasculated. I was really just dancing around her, trying to not upset her, in hopes of making things better. And what I came to realize later on was that actually just made it worse, because I didn't have any sense of who I was or what I wanted or my needs and preferences. And I wasn't aware of my emotions, and I was more ruled by my insecurities rather than my own definition of who I was and what I was about. And so when that relationship ended, I didn't know who I was, and it was very, very painful for me. I had to find myself, and then I was lucky enough to get on a path of studying with several of the people that are very established in this realm of masculine feminine polarity. So David Data was my introduction to this work for men, as it is for most people. He's kind of considered the godfather of this masculine feminine polarity space. And studied with him for a few years, studied with some of his students for a few years after that, and um, was able to not only build myself up, but that's what started my own path of understanding this, and then bringing my own contributions. And what I wanted to create for men was a framework of what at least I consider to be the modern masculine, not the 1950s masculine, but a modern masculine. And that's what I wrote about in the book. I'll pause here for a second, but we can go into it later. But that's what I wrote about, this thing called the masculine blueprint, which is a framework that any man can embody to come more into his own groundedness, his own power, but in a way that's very relational with his partner. And I think that's the difference of what I'm trying to bring is beyond some of the alpha dog stuff that's out there, and a lot of the men's work that's about men's sovereignty, bring it in the relational piece of how to be powerful and grounded and relational with your partner.
Yeah, that's my next question, actually, the masculine blueprint. But before I go into that, do you think if you knew now that you could have saved your marriage potentially if you'd had this knowledge?
I don't know that we were right for each other. I think since then I found what really lights me up. Could we have stayed in the marriage, particularly the fact that we had kids together? We could have, but like I said, I've discovered what I need more. But what wouldn't have happened, it wouldn't have gone down in a ball of flames. I would have been aware of my emotions, been able to share those. I would have been able to handle her emotions, which was something that I didn't know how to back then. She was and is a particularly strong woman. I didn't know how to be with that back then. So it would have gone very, very different. Whether we would have stayed together, who knows?
So what you discovered yourself, you discover that this was common for many men? What?
Yeah, that's where the genesis of the book came about, because I started to notice patterns. And it's I think pattern recognition is something I enjoy doing. I wrote another book for business about 15 years ago when I was still in the business world. And that was the same thing, was observing patterns. And so that's what I did here. Was I started to observe patterns in the trainings that I was in. I was starting to observe patterns in the relationship that I was in with another very strong, powerful woman. Um, and so I just started to write those down. And at some point, the list of notes that I'd made to myself got to be so large that I said, I think this could be a book. And then then began to organize it into a more coherent framework. And that was what turned into the book itself. Um, so that was the process by which the book came about.
Mhm. So tell us, what is the masculine blueprint?
Yeah, the masculine blueprint is my offering to the world of what I
Mhm.
think a definition of a modern masculine is. And it's not about having power over. We've had plenty of that over the years and decades and centuries. Um, this is about how a man can be powerful within himself, and very relational with his feminine partner. And My intent was not only does it work in the modern world, but it's also very understandable and actionable. And I think most guys would say, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Give me the framework, give me the paint by numbers. And while we're dealing with more complex topics than to just have a script or paint by numbers, it can be made very actionable. And that's what I did. And so this framework has three very distinct parts. The first is what I call respond versus react. So this is the quality of a man who's, he's very grounded. His nervous system is settled, and people around him can feel that settledness. And there's a certain quality of stillness with which he lives. And when I say stillness, I'm not talking about stoicism. This isn't like
Mm.
you're so clamped down that you don't have emotional responses, but there's a stillness to it. And then from that stillness, you can then start to live life moment to moment out of choice and intention rather than reactivity or your wounding or self-preservation or any of those things. So there's a real choicefulness that you can feel in this man. And you know people like this, Venus. There's guys that that are very grounded. And you just feel that in their presence. And often what happens is that transmits into one's own nervous system, and their settledness actually settles you. And you probably know the opposite too. Guys that are just more jacked up and they're quick to get defensive or quick to explain, or maybe they just talk very quickly. It's a palpable difference that you can feel when you're around a man like this. This kind of groundedness is the foundation for everything else, because from this space, like I said, you can operate more out of intention and choice rather than scripting and reactivity. So that's the first part of the blueprint, which is respond versus react. And I'll just pause for a second there in case you wanted to add anything before I moved on to the other
No, let's hear the
parts.
rest. That's perfect. Let's.
Okay, all right. And then the second element of the blueprint is provide structure. And so, this is the quality of a man who first and foremost, he has inner clarity within himself about what he wants, what he needs. But he also has insight into what the moment calls for, which includes other people. So this is not an exercise in him being narcissistic about this and then actualizing that in the world. He's actually attuned, and in this case, I talk a lot about being attuned to your partner. You know what her preferences, needs, boundaries, etc. You know all that. So as you bring your clarity into the world, you're also folding in what the people that you care for around you need and want, and what makes them thrive, and what the moment calls for. So that is all your inner clarity. And then that turns into outer expression in the form of structure or direction or decisiveness. And so this doesn't mean that you have to make all the decisions. I never tell guys that you have to make all the decisions. What you want to be as a man is, I want you to bring this directional energy into the world and make sure a decision gets made. So even if you don't have to make the decision, you're creating more order, more structure, more forward movement, even if you're facilitating somebody else to make the decision. And so you're able to bring structure into how things get done. You're able to bring directionality into what gets done. And this is all under the umbrella of what I call this directional energy that I try to cultivate in my clients. And it's like a bias for action. It's an awareness of where clarity needs to be brought, and you bring more clarity to the situation. And that's the quality that we're trying to cultivate in this second element of the blueprint, which is, again, provide structure.
Now, just before we go
And
to the
again,
third part, how does I can imagine men might find that confusing with feminism and other, female
yeah,
empowerment. I can see
yeah,
that, and,
absolutely.
there's lots of real life examples of that.
Yeah. Here's, and I'm glad you brought that up. It's very simple. Number one, you're offering your leadership as an invitation, not control. So you have a feminine partner, you bring leadership into the relationship. You don't have this expectation that she's going to absolutely do what you say or do what you suggest or do it your way. You're offering it as an invitation. It's up to her whether she wants to accept your lead or not. But here's the thing I say to guys: if you are trustable and reliable and you do what you say and you're attuned to her needs, what tends to happen is your success rate goes up dramatically when you're folding in her needs and boundaries as well, from the start. And that comes from being very attuned to your partner, to knowing her, both in the moment, what's her state right now, and knowing her over the years of, how is she wired? What are her preferences, needs, and boundaries? And when you know those, you can fold those into your leadership from the start. And what you find is that when you bring the leadership, there are more. It's a higher probability that she's going to say okay and just surrender into your lead.
Yeah,
So that's what I
it's a
tell
nice feeling
guys.
actually to do that, when you're, I consider myself definitely a feminist, but it's kind of nice to kind of go, oh, and not have to think for a
Yeah,
while.
I think there's
Mm,
there's so much like rancor in the world
mm,
about this thing called feminism,
mm,
and it even a feminist, I think, is what you're saying is
mm,
if you're presented with a competent lead, that's once in a while, it's fun to just surrender into it, and you're okay with that.
yeah.
I think a feminist is somebody that knows what she needs and wants. I mean, that's how I would describe my girlfriend.
Mm,
She's a very powerful woman, also has a strong feminine side. She knows what feels good to her, and she's when things don't feel good, when maybe I'm being less relational, she's not afraid to let me know that and reflect that back to me. So um, yeah, even with powerful women, I think men can bring leadership into the relationship, and that's the problem. Is a lot of these guys, when they're with a powerful woman, they tend to back off more, thinking that she can handle
mm,
everything, or that sometimes she's one step ahead. That's what I get a lot. I hear that a lot from my clients. Is they're like, "Wow, she's just always thinking three steps ahead, and I can't even catch up."
mm,
Um, so men tend to back off more when that's really the exact opposite of what might be needed.
mm. And then the third part of the book.
Yeah, the third element is create safety. And what we're talking about here is physical, financial, and emotional. And I don't talk a lot about physical and financial in the first book. I keep telling myself I'm saving that for the sequel.
Mm,
Um, but I do talk a lot about emotional safety. And so we're talking about emotional safety and connection. And this is, can you conduct yourself as a guy so that your feminine partner feels emotionally safe? And that I think most people understand that's a lot about validating her feelings. You may not agree with the facts and the assertions that she states, but the feelings that she's experiencing are 100% real for her. And so a guy that's trying to dismiss, deny, or dissuade her out of feeling actually how she actually feels in this moment, that's where the problem lies, and that's where a feminine being is not going to feel very safe when they're someone's trying to talk them out of feeling however they feel. So I'm working a lot with guys to really create space for the emotions that his partner has. That doesn't mean that you don't sometimes need to set a boundary. Like sometimes the expression can be a little toxic and a boundary might be called for, but more often than not, I'm teaching them how to create more space for that. And I think if I've learned anything over the years is that like my partner wants to feel me feeling her
mm,
in her emotional state. And to me, that's the thing over the years that has most quickly de-escalated more activated situations is when she feels me feeling her in the moment. Um, I have, guys' propensity is to more go to the facts of the situation, and so she's expressing something that might not actually be factually accurate, and that's where the guy goes. He's like, but, no, 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 that's not right. That's not what I said. That's not accurate, and that's where guys get themselves in trouble because they try to go to the facts first, and that pretty much never works. I'm working with these guys to like stop trying to always reconcile the emotions to the facts because often they have very little to do with each other. Um, I have a quote in the book called "Feelings first, facts later," and so if you can create more emotional resonance for her when the nervous systems are activated and help bring that down, there'll be plenty of time to work on the facts later. And so that's again something I'm working with guys a lot on in my coaching and workshops and things like that. That's what tends to create emotional safety. And then I'll just say this last thing. Beyond that, I'm teaching guys how to create more emotional connection. And this is the biggest complaint of the partners of my clients is that there's no emotional connection. And so I'm working with guys for number one, they can receive her state. That's going to create more emotional connection, but also they can share their inner state, like what's actually going on underneath for them. Guys are not very good at that. And so that's something I'm working with guys a lot of, how to share more of themselves and what's going on the inside. And when you do that 9 times out of 10, that's a big contributor to building more emotional connection between the two.
I would say 10 out of
So,
10. Even
well,
I think it's a great thing to
yeah,
share emotions on both sides. Especially sometimes it can be, harder for men maybe to do that. And it's kind of it's
it
very
is.
meaningful when that happens.
Yeah, it is. And I think one of the reasons, I mean, guys are biologically kind of less able to do that easily, but
Mm.
they also have this idea in their mind of a more feminine style of expression, which is going to be maybe a little less contained. I'm teaching them a masculine style of expressing themselves, which it means you feel deeply, but you share judiciously and you share in a way that there's some containment to the expression. So it's not stoicism. We don't clamp down all emotional expression, but we do offer it in a very chosen way. And I think once guys see that masculine style, they start to become more open to expressing themselves.
Amazing. So how does this fit in with the modern Me Too culture?
Let's see. How would I say that? Um, Number one, um, I'm you're gonna have to edit this out, Venus. This is I would say this in the, what we've had to live with over the centuries and millennia is sort of there's that dominance, domineering, there's power over. And that's where Me Too came from, was like
Mm,
women said no more, like F
mm,
this, we're not
mm,
doing this anymore. And then that's where a lot of this came, where women are speaking more of their truth and not putting up with a lot of the shit that men have put them through over the years. um, this model for me, there's nothing about power over, it's power within.
mm,
And when a man can show up in a relationship and he doesn't need to, he's not needing to dominate, he's not needing to control, he's not needing to have the upper hand. He is grounded within himself. So a man that starts grounded, provides leadership as an invitation, and creates emotional safety, that's where you start to have a relationship that is very fulfilling for both sides. And there's not this notion of a man needing to control, which I think is at this point an antiquated notion in relationship. And so I think that's kind of the beauty of the blueprint, is it absolutely fits in with I won't say post Me Too, but
mm.
a world that includes the Me Too movement.
Amazing. So I'm sensing that most of your content is aimed at men who are already in relationships. Would that be true?
Yeah. I'm almost primarily working with men in relationship.
Perfect. And I've seen on your media sheet something about, I'm really intrigued about this, nice guy behaviors. What are nice guy behaviors? And isn't it good to be a nice guy?
Yeah, it's
And why should we eliminate these behaviors? Or
yeah,
I'm intrigued,
exactly.
how would you define a nice guy?
Yeah, let's talk about what a nice guy is. And I want to give credit where credit is due. My good friend Robert Glover wrote the book No More Mr. Nice Guy. You should definitely have him on your podcast. Um, I think he defined it best as, a nice guy is a guy that he presents as having no needs and he's trying to please everybody else. But underneath, he's actually seething and angry because he's never getting his needs met, because he doesn't present those needs. So a nice guy this is where I bring more of my own narrative in. He's got his radar on the world and he's looking for how he should be, what he should say, what he should do that won't create controversy. And often that's just figuring out what people want and trying to give it to them. And they do that because they're scared to have needs. Usually comes out of their childhood, and I don't think we need to go into that depth in it. But so they're really just orienting themselves around everybody else, which, if I could generalize, probably in the first year of a relationship, probably feels good to that person's partner because it's so easy. There's not a lot of fighting. It seems so easy. Everything flows. But over time, and it doesn't take too long, that partner starts to realize, like, this guy has no shape and substance. I don't even know where he stands on anything. and that becomes very maddening for the feminine when they're if they want a masculine partner, if that's what they're after, and that partner doesn't really have his own opinions, doesn't seem to have needs, doesn't bring anything to the table in terms of leadership. That starts to feel very empty and very dissatisfying for a lot of the women, certainly the women that I've talked to about this work. And so that's what a nice guy is about. And again, underneath, he's actually seething, and then that resentment starts to leak out into the relationship. And that's pretty toxic in any relationship when you have that resentment starting to leak into it.
When I think of the words nice guy, I imagine, when you go out, let's say partying or something, there's a group of guys, and there are the kind of maybe more confident, good-looking ones who are getting all the women. Then there's the guy who's just the friend zone. He might, the one who's just too nice, and he just like you think he's nice, but he's just ends up in the friend zone all the time.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
because there's no erotic tension when you're around this guy. He does everything to take the
So should
tension
should we
out of
go
the
for
work
bad
because
boys then?
well, yeah. And isn't, I mean, I'm generalizing here as I say this, of course, but for a lot of women, that's the dream, is like the bad boy that also has a big heart and has,
Mm.
he's sort of like grown out of
Can
his
conquer
asshole
them.
stage. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's really cool actually. Someone who's kind of lived
Yeah.
that, and then they've come to an understanding later in life that they want something
Well,
different. Hmm.
absolutely. Here's how I would describe this. If a guy brings all light, caring,
Mm.
niceness, taking good care of you, then that's great, but it gets boring after a while. If a guy brings all dark, which is kind of little alpha dog,
Mm.
asshole-ish, kind of a little bit of the narcissism, maybe even worse, like it could go like misogyny or sexual abuse, and it could go even as dark as that. But pulling that back, and that, I mean, that just gets intolerable. And at first it's probably fun because it's got that bad boy thing going and it feels fun at first, but then you start to feel your heart getting crushed by this man and his uncaring, not including you, etc. So the trick is, can you be a man that brings the dark and the light? So it's that edge that's governed by the heart. And for me, that's what I'm trying to teach guys in a lot of the workshops I do, how to bring the dark and the light. And for me, I would say that that's kind of that unbeatable combination, where she feels safe around you, but also feels a little of that erotic edge. Yeah,
Mhm.
that keeps things alive and exciting. And you don't get friend zone when you do that.
Okay, great. So what is the number that one of the top killers of attraction in relationship?
And we're not talking about initial attraction. Let's talk
Mm.
about more sustained
Mhm.
attraction. It's just given the demographic that I speak to. Um, I think the number one complaint of most of the partners, either the women that I talk to or the partners of my clients that I talk to, is when a guy gets defensive and she starts to feel chronically unheard. I think when a feminine being is chronically unheard and told that she shouldn't feel the way she feels, I think that's the biggest wound that I've seen in my client base or their partners. Over time, that can, I mean, this as a woman, and I think it's a common experience, is over time that just like crushes you, and it really severs the emotional connection when you don't feel heard, felt, and understood by your partner. And that's the biggest killer of relationship and attraction and openness that I've seen over the years.
I actually interviewed a woman, Jodie, Dr. Jodie, can't remember, it's Carrington maybe, but she actually wrote a book called Feeling Seen, which is really interesting because she talked about the danger of not feeling seen, because then if you're not feeling seen or heard, and then let's say someone pops into your Facebook inbox, someone from your past, and suddenly they're listening to you more. You're in this very vulnerable place, and then your attention starts going to the person giving you attention.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
that's the danger zone of when, affairs can start, and emotional affairs especially, and just
Yeah.
attention going
Yeah.
without side
I think
outs from.
guys have an erroneous assumption that like if their wife's going to have an affair, it's going to be this guy that's really good looking and rich or whatever, but it's probably more likely the guy that just listens to her and makes her feel seen, exactly as you said. And you're right, that's such a big area of vulnerability in relationship.
Mm. So how can people maintain this connection throughout, going beyond the mundane of domesticity and all of this? How would you suggest that people can
Yeah.
maintain this continuous feeling, being able to feel seen and heard in a relationship?
Yeah. Well, let me speak to the guy's side of that because that's who I speak to. I don't coach
Mm.
women generally. I mean, I've done a few over the years, but there are exceptions to the rule. So I'll answer, what can guys do to bring that? And I think the blueprint is the answer. It's like men. Number one, ground your damn nervous system. Stop being so jacked up and defensive and reactionary to your woman. And so I coach guys to do a few things. One is to have a different relationship to their emotions, and there's a whole chapter in the book on emotions from a very masculine lens. But the other is to have a daily embodiment practice, and we didn't even touch on this, but I'm always talking to guys about having a daily embodiment practice that grounds them. So number one, guys, get grounded. Number two, start leading in the relationship. um, this is in your logistical life. What are we doing for vacation? How are we handling home maintenance? It's just like logistical things in life. Like, are you leading or are you leaving it all to her? Are you bringing leadership into your emotional life? Are you the one that brings up hard conversations that need to be had, or do you just ignore it and kind of hope it blows over? I'm saying, men, take the lead, bring that hard conversation up to clear the air on that thing. Are you leading in your sexual life? And I teach guys a lot of how to bring more dark energy into the bedroom and more leadership into the bedroom. And I've actually got a workshop coming up in October on leading in the bedroom. And so, bring some leadership into the bedroom, bring some edge back to things in certain ways. So that's if you want to keep it fresh, lead more. And then maybe the most important thing is build some emotional connection with your woman. Everything opens up when you do that.
Mm.
And the flip side is, if you don't have that, everything is a lot harder in a relationship. Everything's going to seem like way bigger deal than it actually is if she doesn't feel emotionally connected. So that's always my answer to guys about how to keep things fresh. You do those three things, guarantee your relationship will change. Guarantee it.
Amazing. So have you seen many, I'm assuming you've seen lots of transformations in your time in this work. Do you have any? Yeah.
Yeah. And I would, I think one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this is I'm one of those transformations.
Mm.
I went from a very hard relationship with a strong woman, a very dark time in my life when it ended, to I've been in a relationship over 10 years with the same woman. And the relationship is still juicy and
Mm.
hot and fun and all those things, even after all this time. So I kind of like to hold myself out as like, I'm living this thing that I'm sharing with you, and I've seen it happen because I've lived through it myself. And so I know what it's like to go from being very reactionary to pretty grounded. I know what it means to go from not leading at all to bringing way more leadership into the relationship and into the bedroom. And I'm going from not knowing shit about emotional connection into having a pretty strong emotional connection with my woman. So I've seen that, and I've seen this in my clients too. It's I love it when they tell me they've gone from the brink of divorce into something much more powerful. In fact, there was one. It was a couple of months ago. He even found out she was having an affair on him, and but he wanted to stick in it. He didn't want to just pull the ripcord because of it. And they're stronger than ever because they were able to bring way more communication about their needs, and he was able to hear her in a way that he had never heard her before. That was particularly a gratifying one.
Was that the one that was in your book? Because I think I read that.
No, this
Yeah.
one this one just happened a few months ago, so
Oh,
this was
okay.
post. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a pretty common thing. I guess it's just a result of not feeling seen. Like, I guess many of these things. I think the one that in your book was like that. Like the guy wasn't more attractive or more whatever. It was just it's the
Yeah.
attention, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. That was a I remember that story quite well.
Hmm. So what was it like for you changing, your professional journey from, discovering this personally and then making it your job? What was that like?
Man, it's extremely gratifying.
Hmm.
Extremely gratifying. I was in the tech industry, so I've lived in Silicon Valley for almost 20 years, and so I was in that industry for many years. and started to lose my interest in technology and just like raw capitalism. And my interest in the interrelating between the people started to grow. And so I was able to, 5, 6 years ago, I was able to finally make the switch. Um, and it's been the most gratifying phase of my life professionally ever, to spend my whole day talking about relationship, talking to men about relationship, talking to their partners to get their insights. Couldn't be more thrilled with how I spend my time and make my living these days doing this work.
Was it a side hustle that became the main hustle, or was it
It did.
it got
Yeah.
so big you
Yeah.
could afford to kind of change? Mhm.
That was exactly what it was. Just, you got to do both at some point and work, double time, so to speak. But what I did was I started to bring in some of this work into the office. So I
Oh
would
wow.
teach a meditation and embodiment class at this tech company that you probably even know the name. At like every like 2 days a week at lunchtime, I would teach a meditation class, and I taught a public speaking class, which was really a lot of the same embodiment work about, getting grounded and then projecting yourself. And so I found ways to kind of do the map over in those final years as well.
Amazing. So what's your latest I mean, I guess you must be constantly learning about relationships. It's like living your life is becoming your content almost, would you say?
Yeah, yeah. Whether it's my own relationship or my client situations, yeah, I'm constantly learning and creating. I have another stack of notes this big that it'll be my second book, probably in a year or two. Um, but right now, I'm super excited about this workshop called Leading in the Bedroom, and I know you talk a lot about sexuality, and
Mm.
this is my offering of to men of how to bring a little more darkness into the bedrooms and then marry the dark to the light. So it's how can you be a powerful lover, bring some edge to, your suburban relationship, and teach a guy. I'm going to bring in the flogger and show them that a flogger is not, it's not this weird thing that only weird people in the bowels of San Francisco do or something. Like a flogger is a toy for sexuality that brings sensation into her body, and so it's not about whipping somebody. You might run the leather tassels just like over her back lightly and create more sensation in her body. And so I'm part of the Leading in the Bedroom workshop that we'll do here in San Francisco in October is things like that, introducing them to new ways to bring a lot more excitement into their sexuality. So I'm really excited about that workshop coming up.
I give similar workshops all about pleasure and just to kind of shake up the formula and not just do, because I think it's kind of easy to fall into, what works over time,
Yeah.
tried and tested. That's
Great. We should do a workshop together next year in Madrid
Oh
or in
yeah, or Barcelona.
Barcelona.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
actually gave one that's called The Gift of Pleasure, which is all about eliminating penetration and orgasm and really focusing on erogenous explorations. Because obviously with all the collection of utensils that I have at my disposal, there's always a
Yeah.
lot to learn, And I think what was interesting for me was watching this program, How to Build a Sex Room. Have you seen that on Netflix? Because
Did
it's
my girlfriend showed me that one. I remember that. Yeah.
What's so
Yeah.
interesting about that is that all of these couples, for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's about an interior designer going to visit different couples and creating their perfect sex room. It's not a bedroom, it's just a room for sex. And every
Yeah.
room reflects the couples, and you see how vast and varied the world of sexuality is. But what was really interesting for me was seeing that many of the so-called vanilla couples, they actually were secretly interested in fetish things like they went to spanking classes and domination classes. And I think sometimes for me, what's most interesting about that is not just the power roles, the power dynamics, but the sensuality of it. And it's like you're talking about the flogger. That's what people don't understand. Or even with a crop, you can just use it, to caress and then maybe a light spanking, but it's not about pain or anything dark.
Right.
It's just about sensation in different parts of the body, which, the erogenous zones. So these parts of the body just so they're just not stimulated enough. It's like when you go to the hairdresser and they give you that head massage, like 5 more minutes. We just don't touch those parts of the body enough, going beyond the tits and the ass and the genitals. We have to kind of go
Exactly.
beyond there, and just really explore everything.
Yeah, we want to teach men and women to give pleasure and derive pleasure from giving pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And like, how can you truly open to receive pleasure? And I think a lot of men don't have those skills. And so there's so much around, like I like what you said, non-penetrative, non-orgasmic pleasure. There's so much there
Mm-hmm.
for couples. I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, because otherwise it just tends to be, minimum amount of, it's like sex, there's some penetration, or is usually that's how people define sex. If it's not penis and vagina sex, it's not sex. But if you eliminate that, there's a lot of imagination that can come from it. And also just taking turns in the power, like just being passive or just a blind. One of my favorite tools for my workshops is the blindfold. Because once you wear a blindfold, that means I'm not doing anything.
Yeah.
That's a very kind
Yeah.
of quite liberating space.
Yeah, and it takes practice sometimes to surrender into receiving. We're so used to giving that sometimes we just need to
Mhm.
surrender into receiving. And blindfolds definitely help that.
Do you have any tips for people who are entering into a routine and they're busy and tired?
Um, well, it's probably more on the generic side of like make a commitment to expanding your sex life, and it doesn't have to become 50 Shades of Gray per se. It could be, much different than that. It could be a great exercise, which I'm sure you've done before, is you sit across from each other and you take turns touching the other person in different ways to create pleasure. So like 15 seconds, 15 seconds, 15 seconds, and just explore. And we used to do this thing called what we just kind of jokingly called Pussy Workshop, which was we're in bed, but it's not a session of full on sex. It's more of like a practice, like a sports team. You have practice and you have game. So it wasn't a game, but it was practice, and I was learning to pleasure her um, in terms of oral sex. And
Mm,
so I was able to try different things and ask her how it was, and she would correct me. And that's all the kind of stuff you don't want to do. You don't want to kind of have that level of exchange when you're actually having sex. So you have a practice. And so have a little body workshop between you and your woman,
mm.
and learn her body. I mean, that you want to keep your woman juicy and wanting you, like, know her body, man. That's advice I give. Know your woman's body. Know how to play her body like a fiddle in terms of pleasure giving. And uh, that's that's going to be a real big boost to your relationship.
Absolutely. I started my sexual or sex blogger journey as a fetish model, fetish content creator. So on my website, I've got a fetish glossary of 50 different fetishes. And what was interesting is I have a lot of men writing to me over the years, and many of them are feeling a lot of shame around their fetishes, and they don't really know how to come out as a fetishist to their partners. And one of the common ones is being a foot fetishist, and then people are just thinking that it's weird. Or my advice is just give her a good foot massage. Just start there. But do you have any advice for men who have these secret kinks and they're only resorting to, let's say, online stimulus for that?
Right. Yeah. Be brave and share something with your woman. I'll convince them through just saying there's so much benefit. When you trust your woman enough to share kind of one of your darker fantasies, she's going to really appreciate that first and foremost. Number two, she's going to be pretty psyched you told her, because she wants to pleasure you.
Mm.
And let's assume it's not something weird. I mean, when I say weird, I mean more like criminal, like
Yeah.
underage
Mm.
people, or whatever. But maybe you just want your ass played with. I think that's a big one for a lot of straight guys, is like maybe they want some stimulation around their ass. And so your woman's going to really appreciate it when you do that. And the thing is that if you don't do that, you are resorting to porn, as you said, Venus. You're kind of resorting to porn to kind of scratch that itch. And even if she never knows you're doing it, even if it doesn't cause an overt problem, there's a subliminal hiding in the relationship. And when you really, let her know that fetish, and then maybe she's game for doing it with you, or to you, or whatever it is, um, you're gonna feel, I don't know, it's just more in integrity. And I don't mean you're being dishonest necessarily. It's not about an honesty thing, but it just feels like you're more. in your integrity when you're satisfying your fantasies with your woman rather than on porn,
Mm.
which, you know, it's not like you're cheating, but it's still external to the bubble that the two of you have created.
Mm, definitely. I think the sexiest thing is complicity when you create complicity and you can kind of, really share those secret parts of you and fun parts, etc. Mm,
Absolutely. And
mm,
how fun to live those out with your partner, rather
definitely.
than just on a screen or something like that.
Definitely. So what are you working on now? You mentioned you have a workshop coming up in October. Apart from that,
Yeah.
what else are you doing?
Yeah. The workshop in October is here in San Francisco. Should be the 11th through the 13th. That's what I think I've settled on. And it's called Leading in the Bedroom. So we're going to talk about how to bring a lot of leadership into the bedroom. And it's not just techniques. This is way beyond techniques. This starts with men cultivating more what I call dark energy and then bringing that into the bedroom. And a lot of guys bring a lot of nice guy energy into the bedroom, but that's not enough. That's all light. We want to give you some dark too, give you a little edge. And and then we'll talk about techniques. But what we do is I bring in these amazing feminine practitioners. So these female coaches that are some of the deepest women I know. And they really help tune these guys up. And when we do that, it always blows the doors off the place because the guys get served so well. So super passionate about that. Right now, my big thing going is my relationship repair boot camp. And so I take a cohort of 10 to 12 men through an 8-week process. And that's been a lot of fun to do and really, really has gotten a great reception from the several cohorts that we've done so far. So I'd say if anybody wants to find out about my work, go to gsyoungblood.com or check me out on Instagram, gsyoungbloodmir. And you can see what I'm up to and some of the things that I talk about.
So do you give the people in your courses, let's say, some homework so they can test with their partners, they can try out, or is it just the
You're
session?
saying in those courses, do I do
Yeah,
that? Yeah,
yeah. Uh-huh.
yeah,
Like for
yeah,
example, the
absolutely.
cohort, the one that 10, 12 weeks, would you, between the sessions, would you give them like say homework and then you kind of report back and so you see how things are going?
Yeah, that's
Uh,
part of what we do is they get the homework
cool.
and then guys come back and they can report to other men,
Yeah.
So there's an accountability element. That's why I like to do the group
Mm.
program because there's that community and accountability element to it.
And one question that's interesting. Do you have any tips about how to make consent sexy? Like, for example, I had a friend of mine who was with a guy who was probably a Mr. Nice guy, and she complained that he asked for consent for certain things. She's thinking, I'm here, aren't I? I mean, just assuming that everything else was a given. But there's also a technique called enthusiastic consent, where you're like, can I take your top off? Can I, that can be kind of fun as well. Do you have any tips about that? 'Cause that's a big thing now with the, post Me Too era.
Yeah, let's see. I've never gotten this question before, but you know, we don't want it to be like where the guy's all jacked up about it, like, oh shit, okay, I got to get consent from everything. So don't get so serious about it. Um, and be like more coming from a scared place of like, I don't want to cross any lines. I just want to be a
Mm,
good guy, where you start to go over the top. That's just their nice guy behavior.
yeah.
It's about, for me, it's more the energetics of it. And it's, and you're with the woman and she's in front of you. And, it's about presence. It's about
Mm,
pausing. Like you don't just rip, let's just say the top thing coming off. So maybe it's
mm,
early in a relationship. And so well, one, you don't just rip it off, obviously, because that's not consent, but you know you might you might pause and take a breath and ground in yourself, all the stuff I'm teaching to the
mm.
guys. And you reach down and grab a little bit of the shirt and say, you could say, I'd like to take your top off. Is that okay? Or you'd say, is this okay if I take your top off? But it's very slow. It's chosen. There's a lot of eye contact and it's slow.
Mm,
Um, is this okay for you? As you start to pull it up, pull it up 1 inch and say, is this okay?
mm,
And you wait and you're not jacked up. You're not trying to be the nice guy. I'm like, I don't want to cross any line. You're just, is this okay?
mm,
And you're looking her right in the eyes and you're feeling into her like you should feel the yes or the no even before she says the yes or the no. And so
Mm,
it's not just listening to her words, but it's also feeling the yes and the no that's in there. And maybe it's a no for the moment, but that's because she needs to kiss more and sort of relax into the moment more. And you'll know the difference between those if you're really attuned. So I don't know if I've answered your question
mm,
perfectly.
yeah.
Those are all elements of this, um, where it comes from presence and groundedness
Mm,
and attunement rather than just compliance with the new rules of sexuality. And
mm.
because you're a good guy that never wants to get in trouble.
I would say also to express the desire. Let's say, I want to see you naked or something like that and
Yeah.
see how that goes down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You hit it on the head. Express your desire. Yeah,
Um,
desire is sexy. I think the
yeah,
guys don't get
absolutely.
that. Like, yeah, yeah,
Mm,
you get this. Like, your desire creates desire in the other person, and you get this circuit of desire of both wanting. But so many guys, I won't even say guys, so many humans, sometimes we're just very contained and we don't express like if something feels good.
mm.
We're enjoying it, but we're silent about it. And then the other person that has no idea if you're enjoying it or not. And so
I think
ways to
compliments are a
express,
great way as well. Like complimenting, like say, oh, this you feel amazing, or you look amazing, or you're really turning me on. That kind of thing
yeah,
can really go down a long way. Because I think in those situations, there's so many people who have hang-ups, real hang-ups about their bodies and about their
yeah.
sexual prowess, or if they're doing things right. So having a compliment kind of like can help you just relax into the moment.
That's
Yeah.
such great advice. I couldn't agree with you more.
Perfect. So tell us, what's the book that changed your life? I imagine you're going to say the David Data one. Would that be the one, or do you have any others?
No, that was probably the one that,
Uh,
I to go cliche. That really woke me up to something I didn't know at a time when I needed to know it, but I didn't at that time. So yeah, that was probably the one that woke me up the most.
so it's called The Way of the Superior Man. Is that the one?
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, that's the
I
one.
have to
The way
read
of the
that because so
spirit.
many people have recommended that. I've also interviewed Karen Brody on here. She's a man coach.
I know Karen. Yeah, her book
Yeah.
is great.
Oh my God, I love
I
it. I love the
yeah,
archetypes of the men. I just love that
yeah,
book. And they
yeah,
have the bad boy in there as well, like the dog,
yep,
whatever
yep.
it's called. And I also interviewed recently Brian Reeves, Choose Her Every Day or Leave Her. So
Mm,
it's interesting to get that perspective. Because before, I mean, I've been interviewing mostly women on this podcast. So it's good to get some
mm.
different perspective as well. And also more
I,
recently, Dr. Eric Fitzmedrud, who's written The Better Man, which is really interesting, that book as well, because that gave me a whole new perspective on masculinity and yeah, there's some things I'd never considered before. So it's really, really interesting. Do you have any books about, let's say, personal development or the business side of things that have influenced you in like becoming like a personal brand or being your own boss, following your
oh shoot. Um, yeah, on the business side, I bought a couple of Alex Hormozy's books that have helped me offer the right things for people that are packaged in ways that they want to consume them. So Alex Hormozy's got a book on leads and he's got a book on offers that I thought were really good for anybody that wants to build a kind of an online business. I would say those two were very powerful.
what's his name?
Alex Hormozy, Hormozi, I believe.
Okay, I'll check that out 'cause I'm really interested in personal brand. Oh, great. So do you have a quote that you live by?
Um, yeah, you may or may not be the problem, but you are the solution.
Oh, that's perfect. Is that yours?
It is, yeah,
Oh, that's really cool. That's like meme word.
yeah,
So,
yeah. It's intended to. We get so into the blame game in relationship, and it's like, well, it's her fault and it's his fault, and I want guys to say, I don't care whose damn fault it was. I'm
mm,
going to lead us out of this. I don't really care about blame. I care about solutions.
mm.
And so that's the advice that I try to live. Just sidestep all that meaningless bickering over who's right and who's wrong, and what does the moment call for to bring the hearts back into connection.
Amazing. So where can people find you?
GSYoungblood.com, that's the website. You can see everything about my coaching, my boot camps, my mastermind groups, as well as my online courses. So really I've got offerings at every price point for people, who however much you want to spend and invest in this kind of work. So take a look, GSYoungblood.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on the Orgasmic Lifestyle
Mm.
Podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure, Venus. That was a lot of fun.